Ladies and gentlemen, it's time to start talking about designing files. And the program that I recommend for doing this, when you're actually taking an idea in your mind and putting it into a computer file, is a program called Tinkercad. Tinkercad is web-based, so there's nothing to download, but you have to sign up. Here's the deal, is that there are a number of design programs out there, and a lot of them are very difficult to use. And just using Tinkercad is going to save you potentially hundreds, if not possibly even 1,000 hours or more of a learning curve. If you don't believe me, try some of the other programs and just try to use them. Try to design something in there. And what you'll see and what you'll learn is that they're not intuitive. You're going to have to spend a lot of time learning the software and learning the program. Tinkercad has its limitations. There's no question about it. But it is so intuitive and so easy to use that you could literally be designing something new within 10 to 15 minutes. And that's really what we want in this course, is to be able to get to making things quickly. We're always thinking about our workflow, and we're conscious of that. So you're going to have to use something like Firefox. If you're on a Mac, Safari's not going to work, and you're going to sign in. So we're at the sign in page. I'm going to put my birthday in, obviously. It's going to ask for an email. We're going to agree to the terms, and then we create the account. Okay, so the idea of AutoCAD is that the single account is going to give you access to all their products, which is nice. They have a lot of great products, but Tinkercad is king. So we're all signed in, we're ready to go. Let's go. And I'm going to teach you based on how I learned. There's a navigation part of this. So when you come into the first screen, they're going to have some lessons here. They're pretty good, I mean, if you want to follow them, but I'm going to show you my own. We're going to skip through all this stuff. Yeah, these screens are pretty good, and I'm going to leave them to you. So anytime we get lost and we want to go to Tinkercad, we can come up to the top left-hand corner, click on Autodesk Tinkercad, and it should take you back to your Tinkercad account. And we are going to click on New Design. So if you do want to do those help screens, they don't take very long. They're actually pretty good. And all we're going to do is get familiar with this layout space. I'm using a Mac, but most of these controls are going to be similar on a PC, if you have it. Another thing that you're going to notice is that up in the top left-hand corner, we have the name of it. And it always gives some really funky random name. We're going to call it Navigation 1. The work plane is kind of tricky sometimes because you will want to try to look at something and you can't quite get the right angle on it. And so it's important to remember where the center point is. It's not marked, but it's right here. So as I zoom in, the closer I get, I can see that center point, and you're going to use that a lot to line certain objects up. All I'm doing is I'm rotating forward and backward on my mouse. If I do a left click and drag, you can see I have the ability to select certain items. And if I do a right click and drag, and then I move it, I can rotate the work plane. I can also slide on my trackpad. So this is going to be most of your navigation. We can also get under objects by going all the way around. And this is going to be very useful in the beginning, is to get comfortable with this. So I want to familiarize you guys with the work plane itself, just some of the basic ideas here. This grid is every square that has a grid around it is 1 centimeter, which means these little teeny guys in here, this is 1 millimeter in each direction. When we're talking about moving things left and right, we're talking about the x-axis. You're going to hear me refer to this a lot. When we're talking about moving an object in this direction, I'm talking about the x-axis as it applies to the front edge of the work plane. When we talk about moving it forward and backward, we are talking about the y-axis. And when we're talking about clicking and moving something up and down, we are talking about the z-axis. So those are the 3 dimensions of the work plane. The size of the scale, 1 centimeter here. Anything with an outline is 1 centimeter. Any of these little squares is 1 millimeter. And we can control how much we can move it by clicking on this. I'll demonstrate that in just a second. Some of the basic motions that we have. You can see that we can move objects into the plane. It's actually intersecting it. Select the subject that we want to move. This arrow up here is up and down. If we want to move side to side, we just click and drag. We can move it just by dragging the mouse. And changing the orientation is going to make it easier for you to move the object in different directions. This is something that's sort of like riding a bike. You got to get a hang for it in the beginning, and once you get the hang for it, you're going to be good to go. So just basic understanding of the axis directions and the scale and how to move it around. What I want you guys to do is to come over here. You're going to left click on a box and drag it over to your work plane. And you can see that it gives you this orange highlight, which is basically showing us, about where you're going to set it down. And once you do that, the shape is going to give you a number of options, including things like a radius. You can see that we can change the shape of the object by changing from a square to a sphere. The number of steps, if it has more than one side, you're going to be able to see that. I'll demonstrate that in a minute. This is a very useful one. We can change the length of it if we wanted to. I almost never use the length, width, and height. So when we're looking at a new object on the work plane and it is selected, we get a number of controls. If it's not selected, you're not going to see those items. The corners, when we go over these white boxes here, it's going to give us some measurements in terms of the size of the object that we've placed. So as I hover over this white square, you can see that we know it's 58.69 millimeters wide and 56.39 millimeters deep. If we go over the middle one, we know it's 17 millimeters tall. And this is the proportion scale to real life. This is why it's so important to get calipers and to measure these prints as they come off, is that as you make adjustments, this is the scale of it, is the idea. A critical control that you're going to be using a lot is the hole. So if we press hole, we get this kind of diagonal gray view. That is transparency. And what that means is that we're going to be able to see through the object, and we've turned it into an empty space. So solid and empty space. Everything that I'm showing you, pause the video if you need, and try some of these techniques. When I change the size of an object, I do it by moving these black squares. So if I just wanted to change, you'll notice that when I highlight this, it's only giving me the y-axis. So if I highlight that black square and I move it forward and backward, I'm only changing that y-axis. If I go to the left and right, it doesn't change anything. When I select a corner, I can change both of them. You can see that we get both the x and the y-axis highlighted, these measurements here. And I can change both of them. And if we wanted to change the height, we would come in and change the height. This is where a lot of your controls are going to happen, is when you're coming in and you're changing the size of shapes and we're moving things around. It's very, very intuitive, very easy. Children can do this. So if I didn't like this, I could hit delete and it would be gone. If I wanted a different shape, let's say a cylinder, I can bring that in. Here come the controls again. And we get this bevel in these sides. So when we're looking at the number of sides of this shape, it's saying that we have 20 different sides to this cylinder. When you print that up, you might see those sides. You may not want 20. You may want it to be a little bit smoother, and this is where we can add more sides. And you can see that it becomes more and more fine. So when you are creating an object and you have minimal sides, it's going to be a little bit rougher. And there are things we can do, such as the bevel. So when we're talking about the bevel, it's talking about the edge of the top plane as it meets the side plane, and we can obviously change that bevel to get slightly different shapes. We can change the segments of the bevel to make it more smooth. So there are a lot of powerful tools in here. You'll also notice that we have these rotational controls, these circular guys. So like when we click on that and we get this blue kind of compass grid around it. Let's do something a little bit more obvious here. We're going to come back to a square. Is that when we rotate within that inner compass, you can see that we're locked at 22.5 degrees. And then when we click and drag out to the further one, we can do individual degree turns like this. This is where I live, is in the outer single degree turns. Something else I need to point out that's very important is that the snap grid, you'll notice down here on the bottom, is almost every time I open a new project, I come in and I turn this to 1 millimeter. The snap grid essentially allows us the fine detail of movement. So before, when we scroll this, it would be like 19, 18. When we are in the 10th millimeter snap grid, it allows us to shift the size of the object within 10th millimeters, which is going to be very useful and very precise. I wish it would be hundredths, but it's not. If we come up into the 5 millimeter snap grid, for example, and we move this, you're going to see that it's going to stay within 25, 20, 15, 10. So there's a time and place for it, but 99% of the time I am right here. So very basic overview so far of some of the controls. If you can master just those steps in the beginning, you're going to be in pretty good shape. What I would recommend as an exercise, and I would really strongly recommend you guys do this. You see that when I click and move this, it's telling you how far you move it in certain directions. So we have an idea. All these things are going to come into play. What I would recommend is start getting comfortable with the different shapes. Come in here, take a look at the different steps or the different controls we have for each shape. Practice changing it into a hole. It's very powerful. We got cones. We got all kinds of shapes. We got letters, wedge, pyramids. I mean, there's tons. I use, surprisingly, a lot of these in my designs. Those are basic shapes. And we come in here, and then we have text and numbers. So if you want to do letters, there they are. If you want to do characters, so kind of these random shapes, here they are. Different kinds of connectors. So these are all basic shapes built into Tinkercad that you can take and you can tweak them, you can do different things. You got dinosaur prints. If you wanted to print up a dinosaur, there it is. Really powerful. That is some basic navigation. Practice moving around, practice putting objects on to the work plane, change your view, rotate around. That's a very basic exercise in the beginning.